It's hard to believe that AMD first introduced the world to the Ryzen series of processors over 2 years ago now, and yet here we are. In just a couple of weeks the company are set to launch Ryzen 3000. So my name's Paul, and in this video we're going to be taking you through everything you need to know about the Ryzen 3000 series of processors, the performance, the prices, the specifications, and also compatibility with older generation motherboards, and what you'll get if you decide to invest in the X570 series. If you do enjoy the video, be sure to subscribe for more content and also give the video a like. As a quick piece of backstory, the first generation of Ryzen launched in February 2017. There was a lot of excitement for the CPUs prior to their launch. AMD had touted up to a 40% IPC gain compared to its piledriver architecture, which was a lofty goal to be sure. Despite excitement, there was still a lot of skepticism Team Red could actually achieve the task. But they didn't achieve it. They smashed it. Lisa Su announced to an excited crowd that they had hit a 52% improvement in performance compared to its previous generation processors. But more than that, these CPUs would bring mainstream processors up to an impressive 8 cores and 16 threads thanks to SMT. The 8-core announcement in particular was cause for celebration, with Intel forced to launch Coffee Lake's 6-core SKUs as quickly as possible, as the core count war had begun. It's not to say that the first generation of Ryzen processors were perfect. The lower clock speed, frequency and core latency compared to Intel did hurt game performance, although a lot of this was also down to Windows Scheduler and software, which in many cases received performance patches such as Rise of the Tomb Raider. But for anyone who was doing more than just pure gaming, such as content creation, the AM4 platform was just an excellent choice. It was made all the better because of AMD's commitment to it. If you bought AM4, AMD promised you would be good to go for several generations of future Ryzen processors, and the Zen Plus architecture powered Ryzen 2000. We did see modest IPC gains of around 3%, a claim from AMD that we did test and confirmed, plus a small clock speed increase, and just as importantly a more robust memory controller along with the launch of the 400 series platform. But, as they say, that was then, and Ryzen 3000, aka Matisse, and Zen 2 are now. But, as they say, that was then, Ryzen 3000/Zen 2 is now. So, what's different about this launch, and what do you need to know to get rocking and rolling with AMD's latest range of processors? The release date for all of the Ryzen 3000 series, with the exception of the 3950X, is July 7th. With the aforementioned 16-core beast, you'll need to wait a bit longer as it doesn't launch until September of this year. For the pricing information, we've only had the official US prices released so far, but the 3950X is going to cost you $750, the 3900X is going to cost you $499, the 3800X is going to cost you $399, the 3700X $329, the 3600X $249, and finally the 3600 is going to cost you $200. The top dog is the 3950X, of course. 16 cores, 32 threads, 4.7 GHz with boost, and operates with a base frequency of 3.5 GHz. AMD have also confirmed that the 3950X gets cherry-picked silicon as well, so it should clock the best overall. Then the 3900X has 12 cores, 24 threads, slightly lower boost frequency at 4.6 GHz, slightly higher base frequency. The 3800X has 8 cores, 16 threads, 4.5 GHz boost, 3.9 GHz base. The 3700X has the same number of threads and cores, but with a slightly slower boost at 4.4 GHz with a 3.6 GHz base. And then the 3600X and 3600 both have 6 cores, 12 threads, but with 4.4 GHz versus 4.2 GHz, and 3.8 versus 3.6 GHz, and this is of course for boost and base frequencies respectively. Boost frequencies with Zen 2 aren't quite as simple as Intel because they work based on power consumption and heat, and will automatically adjust themselves based upon workloads and other conditions of the processor. According to AMD, with Precision Boost Overdrive enabled, you can see clock frequencies increase by about 200 MHz over stock operating frequencies, for example, and all of the CPUs will officially support DDR4 speeds of 3200 MHz, although AMD have reported boards running memory at over 5000 MHz, which is extremely impressive. We'll go into memory clock frequencies in just a moment. You will also notice that the 3600 and 3600X and the 3700X and the 3800X are very similar spec-wise, but with clear differences in TDP as well as clock frequencies. At a guess, we will see differences in overclocking potential and boost potential of these processors, but obviously we don't have the processors on hand yet, and given they're not released, we'll just have to wait to see what the differences are in the real world. But just something to bear in mind if you're thinking of ordering one of these. So the 16 and 12 core desktop processors are indeed continuing AMD's tradition of increasing the core count for the mainstream desktop. So the good news is that if you already own a 300 or 400 series board, you may be good to go for the 3rd generation Ryzen processors without needing to plonk down the cash for a new motherboard, for example on the 500 series. We'll start with owners of legacy motherboards first, and then discuss the new features of the 500 series to make things simple. Ryzen 3000 series CPUs are identical in terms of socket, so you'll need no converters for the socket, but you will need to update your BIOS, and clearly adding support for legacy motherboards will be down to the vendor. There are also some motherboards you can update without a CPU being present, or without the CPU being recognised, but not all boards support this feature, so do check with the motherboard manufacturer. Personally, I would advise if you currently have a system that's up and running with a CPU installed, update your BIOS first, then change your processor and sell it to your friend or throw it on eBay. AMD have also confirmed you will not incur a performance penalty from running an older generation board. So to be clear, your CPU will not suddenly run at lower frequencies or burst into flames, but you will lose out on 500 series features. We'll discuss more on those shortly, such as PCIe 4. PCIe 4 and its impact to you will vary based upon your usage scenario as well as your applications. To make things super simple for this video, if you're only doing gaming and run a discrete GPU and a few SSDs, especially if they're SATA, you probably will not benefit immediately from PCIe 4. But if you want a higher core count processor that will be running lots of SSD drives and applications that will really benefit from fast read and write speeds, such as heavy 4K video editing and multitasking, then PCIe 4 and other functionality of a 500 series board will be probably something you would want to consider. In theory, you should still get quite a lot of performance out of the older boards, and memory compatibility thanks to the Zen 2 memory controller should mean you do pretty well. So it's commonly thought that A320 motherboards will not support the Ryzen 3000 series CPUs, and that's not 100% correct. Some motherboard manufacturers have released BIOS updates, these include BioStar by the way, which will allow Ryzen 3000 CPUs to run on select A320 motherboards. I've gotten this confirmed by AMD, but in general, if you have a B350 board, X370 board, X470 board, or of course a B450 board, chances are much greater that those boards will be updated for Ryzen 3000, and obviously if you have a cheap A320 board, well, overclocking and other features are not exactly a guarantee. So what about the 500 series boards? Well, the big feature, of course, with the 500 series board is that they have PCIe 4. This feature was going to be made available for legacy boards, but due to signaling issues, plus as well some of the boards just not being able to handle it on the chipset, AMD decided that this was not a good idea. So the I/O of the board itself will be down to the AIB to decide, in other words, what ports the board has. But as you can see from the most modern I/O slide provided by AMD, the Ryzen 3000 CPU directly communicates with several devices, and then other devices will be communicated with the PCH. On top of faster SSDs and graphics card I/O, we also see the inclusion of 4 super speed USB ports for great connectivity to external devices. What we do know about these boards is they are created often with fans on the chipset to keep them cooler in operation, though this fan can ramp up and down depending on the workload usage with some boards. Many of them are also with a large number of phases and beefed up designs, especially compared to the 300 series boards. But how this will translate to overclocking and tweaking of the processor and memory, we just don't know yet. Anything else we need to know before diving into the architecture? Well, a couple of things. There is also the matter of a Windows update, version 19.03, which is part of the May update. This will affect older Ryzen processors as well, such as the 1000 series. Basically, to simplify what it does, it's designed to reduce the latency penalty of the CCX/chiplet design of AMD processors. The chiplets, of course, only affecting some processors like the 3000 series and Threadripper. We'll get more into the architecture stuff soon, exactly what that means, but essentially what happens with this update is it attempts to keep threads of an application onto a single CCX, that is, a cluster of 4 processor cores. Then, if the application uses all of these cores/threads, it'll split the workload and start issuing them to the next CCX. We will also see faster clock speed adjustments too, from 30 ns down to just a few. And thanks to the update, this will affect legacy processors, but the Ryzen 3000 series have this part and parcel of the actual CPU, so it isn't reliant on an update to work. So what about the architecture changes then? So AMD have made a variety of sweeping changes to the underlying design of Zen 2 architecture, which powers the latest generation of Ryzen processors. We see a drastic IPC increase compared to the older CPUs, around 15%, and this is combined with a nice increase in clock frequency. According to AMD, users should see a dramatic performance increase going from a 2000 series to a 3000 series CPU, even at the same core count, so a 2600 to a 3600 for example. Indeed, AMD are touting a 21% performance increase with single thread performance with Cinebench R20, which is pretty huge. So let's talk about the architecture basics. If I get enough feedback, I'll go deeper into the architecture and really analyse the changes, but this video will give you a broader overview and what's important to you. So, the Ryzen 3000 series operates with between 6 and 16 cores, depending on the model of the CPU that you're purchasing. All of these CPUs have SMT, simultaneous multi-threading, enabled. But AMD do not build these processors with a single large monolithic die. Instead, they've opted to create them out of chiplets, which can be pieced together to form a larger and more powerful whole CPU. Moore's law basically said that the number of transistors will double every 24 months, but this pace has slowed considerably over the past couple of years. While we could have an entire discussion by itself on the pursuit of different materials other than silicon for the production of computer chips, in the here and now, it's silicon what we're using, so too bad. Basically, in the traditional manufacturing of processors, they are created with a monolithic die. That is, that everything is integrated directly, so all of the CPU cores, cache, I/O controller, other bits. The problem with this is obvious: yields. The manufacturing process is not perfect, and quite simply, you're going to end up with parts that do not make the cut. Traditionally, these parts can be sold at lower-end products. For example, lower clock frequencies or disabled cores, but it's still more expensive to produce, particularly if certain parts of the chip are damaged. So AMD have decided to take a feather out of their data center cap and go with the chiplet route for mainstream as well. Basically, chiplets are created with modules plonked down together with an I/O controller to make up the CPU. So, what does that mean? Well, in the case of a 3600, you have a single chiplet which has 2 processor cores disabled and is directly connected to a 12nm I/O die via AMD's Infinity Fabric. This die has the task of communicating with the main system memory as well as PCIe devices on the system. If you're using a Ryzen 9 3950X, then it has 2 chiplets which are present on the CPU, and those are also connected to the I/O die. The die also handles communication, just like with the 3600, but the communication between the 2 chiplets is also handled by the I/O die as well. So, How are chiplets created and what do they actually contain within them? I'm glad you asked. Just like the previous generation Ryzen processors, they are split down into CCXs. Each CCX has 4 processor cores capable of 8 threads thanks to yummy nummy SMT and its own 16 megabytes of level 3 cache. This is doubled, incidentally, from the previous generation. Oh, and AMD actually refer to this as game cache if you're questioning just how important level 3 cache is to these processors. Then, as I mentioned, 2 of these CCXs then form the larger chiplet. This has dramatic consequences for both density and scaling, with the 3rd generation CCXs measuring 31.3 mm squared. This is 47% smaller than the 2nd generation. Of course, this also means that the 31.3 mm squared is 4 processor cores and also the level 3 cache. And judging from what we know about the previous generation Zen CCXs, it's probable that the cache actually is taking up at least 40% of that space. The Zen Plus chip is a 12nm process which was 44 mm squared for the cores and 16 mm squared for the level 3 cache, although the cache was only 8 megabytes compared to the 16 megabytes of level 3. The whole chiplet, also known as CCD, for Zen 2 is 74 mm squared. So the reason this is so small compared to the previous generation, other than the fact it's 7nm versus 12, is that the I/O is now thrown on, of course, the I/O controller. But here's the other thing, and worthy of discussion. 74 mm square is with 32 megabytes level 3 cache for the 8 cores. It makes you wonder if custom designs such as consoles may get away with less level 3 cache to reduce this size. In performance scaling, AMD claim that we're going to get a 1.98 times versus the twice the core count. Zen to Zen Plus saw some modest changes, reducing latency for caches, tweaks to memory controllers, slight clock speed increases and so on. But it's definitely not true for Zen 2. While the design itself is familiar enough so you would recognise it in a crowd, it's grown and matured over the years and has definitely improved significantly in areas. We see improved branch predictor, TAGE, also known as tag geometry, and further refinements to instruction prefetching. This means the CPU will be better at guessing code paths and actually reducing stalls in the pipeline while it waits for the next instruction. Basically, you want to keep relevant instructions flowing constantly to the CPU's execution units so they're as busy as possible and not having stalls while they're sitting around idle because the wrong instruction was grabbed. The cache structure was also overhauled. Level 2 cache is the most similar at 512 kilobytes per CPU core, so that means that each CCX has 2 megabytes of level 3 cache, or up to 4 megabytes per chiplet. The level 1 instruction and data cache is 32 kilobytes per core, which means that compared to older Zen architectures, we actually see the instruction cache halved, but is made 8-way associative. This is combined with double the micro-operation cache and other tweaks. In theory, and we don't have a Zen 2 based CPU yet for testing, this should mean that the level 1 instruction cache should have a better utilization compared to the previous generation, and is a compromise based upon the space available on the die and performance. The floating point performance is at another radically improved area. Zen 2 doubles FP performance by increasing load and store bandwidth from 128 to 256 bit. Now the execution unit is 256 bit. This essentially means that an AVX2 instruction can run on a single CPU cycle rather than needing 2 to complete. As mentioned above, the chiplet is directly tied to an I/O die, and this is then tied to PCH, Platform Controller Hub, as well as the main memory. For the best yields, the chiplet was manufactured on 12nm. According to AMD, the official speed supported with the Ryzen 3rd generation is 3200 MHz for the RAM, but with a 1-to-1 mode, you can use this with Infinity Fabric up to DDR4 3733 MHz. With a 2-to-1 ratio, you can use faster RAM, but this may cause latency issues. But of course, as always, we're going to need to test this with different timings, memory speeds, and as you would imagine, different workloads. So what about performance then? Well, so far AMD provided a plethora of different benchmarks, with several game titles being tested along with various applications, with Cinebench unsurprisingly featuring rather heavily in their benchmark suite. It is important to realise that we only have performance from AMD themselves. There have been leaks online, but those have frequently been with engineering sample chips and don't necessarily represent the closed test environment. Firstly, it's hard to imagine that games won't benefit from the clock speed jump alone, as clearly if you're ramping up clock speed with everything else being equal, you'll increase frame rate. But given the IPC tweaks AMD have squeezed into the 3rd generation Ryzen, it's hard to believe that Zen 2 won't be quite the leap forward for gamers. Whether it's able to outperform Intel is not known though. The test we've seen doesn't explicitly state the configuration used, only that it's 1080p at maximum quality settings. It doesn't tell us the GPU. There's also not a huge amount of performance difference between the results of different Ryzen CPUs, and that has caused some folks to raise their eyebrows, but remember we don't know how these CPUs boost in real world and maintain their clock frequencies. Given games don't exactly need 32 threads to run, that's also another reason performance results aren't hugely different, most likely across different SKUs. I think that if in general it's within a few percent of Intel's gaming performance, it will likely make most users not care, but as always we're going to have to wait and test these processors. Results for applications like Cinebench and Lame MP3 are simpler to understand though. You can basically think of the Ryzen 3000 processors as decimating their predecessors. It'll be very interesting to start hammering the system with lots of multitasking. Let's say rendering something with 3ds Max while doing something else, and you can see how the dual channel memory holds up. But given the RAM is running at much faster frequencies compared to Threadripper 1950X, and with a large level 3 cache and better prediction, all of which means that we get less hammering of the system RAM, I wouldn't be surprised if the answer to all of this is very good indeed. With all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video and found it informative. If you did, then definitely consider subscribing to the channel and also giving this video a like. And comment down below to let us know which processor you are going to be purchasing of the Matisse lineup, and also whether you're considering purchasing an X570 motherboard. In the video description you can find us on the social medias, which you can follow us on if you so desire, as well as Amazon affiliate links, so if you are thinking of buying something new and shiny, consider using those because it doesn't cost you anything, of course, and it's an easy way for you to support the channel. You can also find us on Patreon as well if you so desire. But I'm going to let you all go, so take care of yourselves, thanks for watching, bye for now.